What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TTB Ravens Media, bringing you Ravens content every single day. If you want to see that daily Ravens content, please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. And as always, it's Mock Draft Mondays. So what I'm basically going to be doing in today's video, well, actually, it's the second video today. Go check out the part two or segment 2 of the Trust the Bank podcast, talking about potentially trading up and drafting a corner. But in Mock Draft Monday, I do a no trade mock draft with what the Ravens have, at that exact moment. And, here's what it is. This one, I did it on PFF because actually I was doing one on the Draft Network, and I took my first pick. And then the second pick, it seems like something was so off because there were players available that are typically drafted in like the top 20. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So I was like, all right, we got to scrap this, go to PFF. It just seemed really off, and I didn't want to have a mock draft that was so ridiculously unrealistic, even though it would have been great for the Ravens. It just made no sense whatsoever. So with that right there, let's get right into it. So with the 27th pick in the draft, I was sitting there and I saw Terence Marshall Jr. And if you saw my video or the part 1 of the Trust the Bank podcast, Joshua and I talked about Terence Marshall versus Rashad Bateman. And we both kind of agreed that Rashad Bateman was not the guy for the Ravens. He's very, very good, but we both would rather have Terence Marshall Jr. Now, both of them would be great, but Terence Marshall was available. We know about Terence Marshall. All Ravens fans know about him by this point. If you don't, 6'3", runs, 4.3, 40-yard dash, good size, good physicality, can go up, get the jump balls, productive years at LSU, even though he was the third wide receiver for, a fair part of his career. Just an absolute stud. The Ravens need a big physical wide receiver that can go up and get those catches, and Terence Marshall is that guy. So I'm not going to talk too much about him. Getting into pick 58, I went with Landon Dickerson. Now, Landon Dickerson, very, very good center. The knock on him is that he does have an injury history. So it's a bit of a risk, but, with the centers in this draft class, obviously there's the really high end ones, but after that, it's like there aren't very many guys that can just come out and start pretty quickly. But Landon Dickerson is one of those guys, so he would be able to start. Now, if he were to get injured, we do have potential backups that could play for him. But center out of Alabama, injury history, but very, very good when he does play. So I'm okay with taking that risk. Comment down below if you don't like the pick because you're not willing to risk it on an injury-prone center. But that's going to be that for pick 58. At pick 104, I went with an edge rusher out of Miami. People from Maryland, people in Baltimore, they probably know the name Quincy Roche. A transfer from Temple to the U. In 2019, he was the AAC Defensive Player of the Year. He was very, very good. He ended up going, obviously, to Miami in the ACC. Wasn't as productive, but still was a very, very solid pass rusher for him. He'd be an outside linebacker. He'd be our edge rusher, and that's something that the Ravens absolutely need. I talk about it all the time about how much they need an edge rusher because they don't have one yet. So addressing that in the first 2 days of the draft is absolutely crucial for this team. Because we're going to need somebody that's going to be able to come off the edge so that when we don't blitz, we at least have somewhat of a pass rush. So I'm very excited. If the Ravens were to bring in Quincy Roche, I would love that draft pick. Obviously I would love it. I picked him in my mock draft. But then looking at pick 131, do I even have to explain it anymore? I drafted Simi Fehoko. If this is the first time you're watching a mock draft of mine, Simi Fehoko must be a Baltimore Raven. Priority 1. He is 6'4", ran 4. I've seen anywhere from 4.37 to 4.42 in his 40-yard dash. He is an excellent vertical threat, great hands, able to catch it, anywhere, behind him, above his head, out in front. He can make those catches. And he's not just straight line speed. He actually ran sub 7 in the cone drill, which is pretty darn good for his size. So he's got agility, and that's another thing that's very nice. But he'll be able to come into the Ravens. He'll be able to be that deep threat. Simi Fehoko out of Stanford, going to be an absolute stud as a deep threat in the NFL. So I've had him in literally every single mock draft I've done because I just want him in Baltimore that badly. At pick 171, I ended up going with Shakur Brown. Now, Shakur Brown, I had in, I believe, the first mock draft I did on Mock Draft Mondays. If you don't know about Shakur Brown, he is a cornerback out of Michigan State. He's got good size, and he's a man-to-man corner. And if you did not see the video that I posted earlier today about the Ravens potentially drafting a corner in the first round, basically what Joshua and I talked about was a lot about how the Ravens, if they got another cornerback, we also talked about this in the Should the Ravens Sign or Draft a Safety video. We talk about if they got another cornerback that excels in man coverage, that would allow Jimmy Smith, that would allow Tavon Young to potentially slide back into the safety position, so that they don't have to be nearly as physical in certain coverage schemes. They wouldn't play it all the time. It would just allow them to play in different spots on the field, and it would just, help our man coverage overall, rather than having Deshaun Elliott out there trying to play man coverage because he's not very good at man coverage. I'm sorry. I love Deshaun Elliott, but he's just not that good. So getting Shakur Brown, a good man-to-man corner out of Michigan State, could be pretty solid. So he's a good playmaker. I think he had 5 interceptions in 2020. So that's the type of thing that, you love to see in, your draft picks, because when you're drafting in these later rounds, you're really going for, potential, because that most of them aren't going to be starters day one. So he could be a guy that could come in if there was a potential Tavon Young. I'm going to knock on wood because really don't want Tavon to get injured or Jimmy Smith, but having that depth could be very beneficial. And that would also allow Anthony Everett to get some time off if he's, not feeling well, or, he's struggling a little bit. That's the type of thing that having depth, it's, we've seen it in recent Ravens seasons. Having depth at the cornerback position is always a good thing. But moving on, pick 184, I went with Patrick Jones the second. I've had him in a couple of mock drafts. I don't know exactly how many. He's an edge rusher out of Pitt, and he's somebody that's versatile. He's dropped back into coverage, I believe, a little bit. He's not somebody that's going to be able to do it, every single play, but the Ravens do drop him back every once in a while, and he proved that he can do that. But he had 17 and a half sacks in 22 games at Pitt, and that's pretty solid. For a late round pick, having a guy that's had good production is very, very solid. He projects most as a 4-3 defensive end, but he'd just be probably like a situational type pass rusher, third down type of edge rusher that could come in for potentially a Derek Wolfe of sorts or something like that. If Derek Wolfe were to need to come out, you could sub in Patrick Jones the second. So not somebody that would start right away, but I'm a big believer in the fact that the Ravens need to address the edge rusher position. So that's what I'm trying to do in this draft, and obviously I'm also addressing wide receiver. Because the Ravens don't have a ton of holes. So drafting multiple players at the same position is still a very solid bet, because having depth and, a lot of guys, they don't work out. Remember when the Ravens drafted Tim Williams and Tyus Bowser, I believe back to back, or second round, fourth round? Only one of them turned out. So drafting 2 guys that are both kind of playing the same position is a legitimate strategy that can absolutely pay off, because if one of them doesn't pan out, having another backup could be very good. So that's kind of why I'm kind of stacking up. But final pick in the draft, pick number 210. I got Jonathan Adams Jr. out of Arkansas State. I love Jonathan Adams Jr. He's a 6'3", big physical wide receiver, can go up and make catches that, nobody on the Ravens can do, which is saying something, because we've seen, all Ravens fans have watched James Prochet's highlight reel. Jonathan Adams Jr.'s highlight reel is better than James Prochet. He makes more insane catches. And that's the type of thing that I would love to see in Baltimore. Obviously he's going to be a very late round pick, so I don't expect him to be able to contribute right away, but somebody as a developmental piece, being able to pair him with T. Martin, with Keith Williams, as they kind of develop this new offense that the Ravens are going to be working with in the new passing game, having them, have multiple players, in Prochet and Jonathan Adams Jr. that are just, spectacular catch machines, is something that's going to be very intriguing. I think that the Ravens could really heavily benefit from it. So I'll run through my guys once again that I drafted. As always, please comment your own mock drafts down below. I typically get a few people that comment their mock drafts, and I love seeing them. Comment any kind of sleeper players that you have at different positions. If you think we should have gone with another position, I didn't draft a safety, I didn't draft a tackle. If you think we should have gone there, let me know. Let me know on my thought players, but. Going through it at 27, took Terence Marshall Jr. At 58, Landon Dickerson. At 104, Quincy Roche. At 131, Simi Fehoko. 171, Shakur Brown. 184, Patrick Jones II. And pick 210, Jonathan Adams Jr. And then, of course, you can count the 7th round pick as the weapon, Josh Oliver. Shout out to Josh Oliver, a.k.a. the weapon. Everybody needs to call him that. But that's going to do it for this second episode of TTB Ravens Media, posted, today. But hit the subscribe button down below if you want to see daily Ravens content. Let me know what your thoughts are on my mock draft, and I'll see all of you again tomorrow.